up the mob. They played the ethnic card, or what you might even call today the race card. Said these men are Jews and they're stirring up the whole city and whatnot. And so they just had this rush to judgment, and they were brought to the city square and stripped, publicly humiliated, beaten with rods, and thrown in jail. And during the night, around 12 midnight, a little jailhouse rock goes on. God shakes the place up, and prison doors come open, and they're free to go, but they don't go. The jailer calls for lights, and he in fact, he was about ready to run himself through with the sword because he thought they had escaped, and that would have been his fate, the death penalty, had they escaped. But they didn't go anywhere. Make a long story short, during the night, Paul and Silas had been singing hymns and been praying to God, and apparently this jailer learned about the gospel through what was going on, and he asked how to be saved, and he ends up getting saved at that very hour of the night. And he takes Paul and Silas out of the jail and washes their wounds. Their backs have been laid open, lacerated, they've been bleeding. So he takes them to his home and washes the wounds and feeds them a meal. And then it's kind of inferred here in the passage that he takes them back to the jailhouse. So he's been converted, he and his family. He's washed their wounds, he's fed them, now he's taking them back. And they're in jail. And the next morning, the magistrates, the city officials, send some translations actually say policemen, over to let Paul and Silas know, okay, we're going to let you go free now. Probably just wanted to teach them a good lesson, Don't come into our city and stir people up like that. We don't like riots around here. Don't ever do that again. So he's probably hoping they've learned their lesson, beat the stuffings out of them, made them spend the night in jail. Now he's just going to let them go. And even the jailer thinks that's what's going on. He's saying, yeah, man, go in peace. And most people probably would have thought, yeah, that's cool. I'm out of jail now. I'm just going to get out of this place. I don't want any more of these people. I don't want to be around this place anymore. I'm just getting on down the trail. Well, that's not exactly the way Paul reacted. Paul's thinking, not so fast. I'm not going to get out of here so easily. So let's take a look at what happens next in verse 37. But Paul said to the officers, they beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now do they want to get rid of us so quietly? No, let them come themselves and escort us out. The officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were alarmed. So they came to appease them and escorted them from the prison, requesting them to leave the city. So Paul is not going to let them off the hook so easily. He reminds them of one important detail that they overlooked. They overlooked the fact that Paul was a Roman citizen. They had failed to do a little investigation. You get the idea that once these men that owned the slave girl got the crowd, all worked up, it kind of got out of control, and there wasn't much of an investigation. It was just okay, these guys are Jews, they must be guilty, let's hand them over. So they just went real fast, and they got a whipping. And who knows, maybe Paul was saying, I'm a citizen, I'm a Roman citizen, you can't do this, but they weren't paying any attention. I kind of thought about, the whole George Floyd incident. He's saying, I can't breathe, he couldn't breathe, and cop wasn't paying any attention. That's kind of maybe what was going on here. Yeah. Maybe people say all kinds of things, and they just get callous, don't really pay attention like they should. Maybe that went on here, I don't know. But they had failed to comprehend that Paul was a Roman citizen. In fact, Silas is one too. And Roman citizens were not to be treated like this. So Paul accused them of 3 violations: a public beating. Remember, they were stripped publicly and beaten. You couldn't do that to a Roman citizen. There was no trial. And 3, they had to spend the night in jail. So all 3 of these things were off limits to a Roman citizen, especially somebody that wasn't convicted of a crime. So in short, it was a rush to judgment, and Paul was letting them know that his civil rights had been violated, and he was not going to let them get off so easy. But you do notice in the text, he doesn't really press charges. He's not going to bring a lawsuit. He's not going to go and hire a bunch of lawyers, come in and, put the screws to these political leaders there in Philippi. But he does seem to want them to sweat a little. Now, I do think he wanted his record wiped clean. He did want a public acknowledgement of their mistake. And when he reminds these city officials that they had violated his civil rights, to say they got nervous would be an understatement. If you notice, it says in the text, they were alarmed. And by the way, if someone claimed they were a Roman citizen and they weren't, that could bring the death penalty. In other words, I'm a Roman citizen, you can't treat me that way. If you lied about that, they could kill you. Now, Paul might have had some documents on him, showing that he was a citizen. That's possible. But just his word would have gotten their attention, because that's not something people would go around and just say, because you get yourself in big trouble.
Killed, so you're not going to risk getting killed.
Yeah. So they believe Paul, and they are alarmed, and they are very much afraid. Now, keep in mind, Philippi is a Roman colony. A lot of ex-Roman soldiers are living there. It was like a little Rome. So this was a big deal for them to be a Roman colony. And here they have mistreated someone with Roman citizenship. So they're upset. But there's several reasons why they would be upset. There is a record in AD 44 by order of Emperor Claudius. The people of Rhodes lost their privilege of citizenship because they did not regard the fact some prisoners they executed by crucifixion were Roman citizens. So there is a record of an entire place losing their citizenship, losing their status as a Roman colony because they crucified some people that were Roman citizens, which was something you couldn't do. You can't crucify a Roman citizen.
So they're dabbling with some fire right now, doing this to Paul. They're like, they take pride in this, and now they may be stripped away from them very easily.
So their whole city could be in jeopardy. And on a personal level, I read where politicians could be banned from office for life if they did something like that. If they mistreated a Roman citizen. So these politicians are, again, to say they're nervous is an understatement. They are alarmed. They're upset. They're like, oh my, what have we done here? This could get us in big trouble.
Got their career on the line too now.
I mean, we've been exempted from taxes. We got all this Roman privilege now. We're about to lose all that if we get in trouble here. I could get banned from office. I mean, any politician, a career politician's not going to like that.
Oh yeah, they're not going to like
banned from office. I've read where they could get their property confiscated, and there is record where they could be executed at the very worst.
Yeah, there's the alarm right
So
there.
when Paul snaps back and says, hey, I'm a Roman citizen, they're like, uh-oh. We didn't even give this dude a trial. I mean, we just had him out here publicly whipped with these sticks. And they were lacerated and bleeding. I mean, we know they had wounds because the guy cleaned their wounds.
Treated them. So
much like that picture I showed you, most likely they were bleeding and they were hurting and they were in stock. So they've been mistreated. And these politicians are like, man, we're in big trouble
here.
And about, like I was saying, to be a Roman citizen, that was a big deal. Just because you were in the Roman Empire didn't mean you had Roman citizenship. There were a lot of people in the Roman Empire that weren't citizens. So if you were a Roman citizen, you got special treatment.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that Paul decided to stand his ground, and it seems like he wants to be for justice. In this matter, not treating someone and maybe setting a precedent for the way Christians can be mistreated in the future. And hey, if I stand my ground here, because we know he's been mistreated in the past as well, and he doesn't always stand up against it like he does here necessarily. So yeah. It's just interesting that it looks like he has a chance to influence these higher ups. He knows, hey, there's going to be some more Christians coming along the way. I want them to think twice about persecuting these Christians.
I could be wrong, but I just kind of get the feeling he's enjoying letting them sweat a little bit. I mean, he's not pressing charges.
Yeah.
He's not going to sue them. He's not going to turn them in. He could, but he's I think he's enjoying just watching them squirm a little bit. They just had the stuffings beat out of them by these politicians.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, you could be in big trouble. So he's just letting them know, hey, I'm a Roman citizen. You're not going to get off so easy. So I want somebody down here to escort us out of this jail. I mean, it does sound a little unusual. We'll look at something in just a minute. We're going to compare Paul's actions with something Jesus said in Sermon on the Mount in just a minute. But
I know where you're going to get.
Yeah, but these politicians, man, they see their careers hanging in the balance, maybe their lives, maybe they're going to lose their property. So they go down and they're apologizing, they're appeasing, they're begging, and they're so please just leave the city. They don't want the press to get a hold of this, and y'all just please leave. They couldn't expel him, by the way. You couldn't expel a Roman citizen from a city if they weren't found guilty of anything.
Yeah.
So they couldn't just expel them, but they were pleading and please leave.
Yeah.
Let's just let bygones be bygones. Let's just go on and leave. Just get out of here. So anyway, so after Paul lets them sweat a little, he says, let them escort us out, and then let's take a look and see what happens next. You're going to see that they are appeased, and after that, they go to Lydia's house. Let's see. But Paul said to the officers, they beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now do they want to get rid of us so quietly? No, let them come themselves and escort us out. The officers repeated this to the magistrates, and when they heard this, Paul and Silas were citizens. They were alarmed. They came to appease them and escorted them from the prison, requesting them to leave the city. And then after that, I don't have that slide up there. It said they went to Lydia's house where they met with the brothers and encouraged them. Then they left. So remember, all this is taking place in Philippi, and Lydia's letting the church meet at her house. She's continuing in her hospitality. Even right after she's converted, she insisted Paul and this missionary team come over to her house. So there's a small church now in Philippi.
Yeah.
So all this started when he gets the vision of the man in Macedonia and said, come over and help us. So he goes over. So Lydia and her household have been converted. And we know the Philippian jailer and his household have been converted. So there's a little nucleus of a church forming there. And it says, went over to encourage the brothers. And there's another little tidbit of trivia here. The use of the first person pronoun ends here. There's been a lot of we passages in here. We did this, we did that. And we believe it was Luke that wrote the book of Acts. So he's including himself, even though he's not mentioning himself, he's saying things like we. And here, it appears that they're going to move on. They went to Lydia's house where they met with others and encouraged them. Then they left. Not we left.
It's they.
They left. So Bible scholars think it's implied here that Luke stayed behind in Philippi as kind of the preacher. And he won't be brought up again until Acts 20, verses 5 through 6, when Paul comes back through. Then it turns back into the we passages. So it's a little subtle thing there, but it's kind of cool. Think about it.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know if I've ever caught that before.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, we touched on this idea of civil rights and Paul demanding his rights. Let's take a look at what Jesus said about civil rights in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. And let's kind of maybe compare what Jesus said to Paul's actions here and see if we can reconcile these two ideas. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." So clearly this is talking about legal rights here in this passage. That eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is Old Testament law, what we even call Old Testament civil law. If you gouged out my eye, I could have your eye gouged out. Or if you knocked out one of my teeth, I could knock out one of yours, and etc. That was the Old Testament law. And Jesus says basically give up that right. It says, do not even resist an evil person. So in other words, don't demand your rights. And it says, someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to the other also. And if you're right-handed, that signifies not only taking a hit this way with a backhand as well, which was a great insult in Jewish culture. It's an insult today too.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you get backhanded.
He said, if someone wants to insult you, you let them insult you. And then he says, if someone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Under the Old Testament law, you couldn't take someone's coat, but you could take their undergarment. It was long, I've heard it compared to a long T-shirt, kind of like a robe, but it's like a T-shirt. The undergarment, and then over that would be the outer garment. Well, under the Old Testament law, couldn't take somebody's coat because they might freeze to death.
Yeah.
But they could, give that undergarment as some kind of collateral. And Jesus said, if somebody sues you, he said, let them have your coat as well. And he said, if someone forced you to go 1 mile, legally under the Roman law, a soldier could be tired from walking on his journey. He could see you walking down the road, tap you on the shoulder, and make you carry
his stuff.
Carry his load for a mile. Jesus says go with him 2 miles. So he's clearly talking about personal rights here. And this is radical. No Jew looking for a militaristic Messiah would want to hear this stuff about turning the other cheek and all that. And so instead of demanding our rights, Jesus seems to be advocating that we freely give up our rights. He does seem to be saying we should be willing to forego our personal rights. So question is, how do we reconcile this with Paul's actions in Philippi? So that's the question.
It's a good question.
Maybe we'll get a lot of good questions and comments tonight.
Yeah.
There is a little tension here.
Yeah.
There's a little tension here.
It's not clear cut here. It's not a cookie cutter Christmas exactly the way you want it to look here. It's kind of a little bit more of a grayer zone here. I'm trying to
I kind of feel like I get it, but I don't know if I can adequately explain it. I mean, if I had to, the best way I know to put it would be like a lot of what Jesus is saying here is what they call hyperbolic. He's using hyperbole, exaggerating for the sake of emphasis. Now, I know some of you out there saying, oh, John's going to be a liberal on this. Well, look what he says. If someone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well, that leaves you naked. Because that's all they would wear, an undergarment and outer garment.
Yeah.
So that cues me off here that, wait a minute, he's probably doing a little exaggeration here.
Yeah.
He said if your eye calls you to sin, gouge it out. I don't think he's saying, I want you to engage in self-mutilation.
Right.
That's in the same sermon,
Yeah. So, no one argues with that one. No one's arguing with that. I think there's plenty of people who have some gouged out eyes. I mean, there could be some people with some pirate eyeballs walking.
A lot of blind men in the church.
Yeah. Looking like Patchy the Pirate coming around here. So I don't see that. I don't know about you.
So that's the way I interpret that. But I do think the idea there is that Jesus, he does not want us to be people that go around demanding our way all the time. We're not to be, always trying to sue somebody and, demanding our rights all the time and just
I deserve this. I mean,
just grievance ridden, about every little thing. I don't think that's the way Christian people should be. But clearly, with Paul's example, there may be times where you do stand up for your civil rights, because it wasn't. We're talking about injustice here. Paul's clearly been treated in an unjust way.
Right. Everything Jesus kind of mentions, I mean, there's no context to what Jesus is saying either. Jesus is being hyperbolic. Maybe someone, he's doing it on purpose to make you think about certain scenarios, to be honest. Jesus does this all the time. He doesn't give you details because he wants you to think of the details.
Yeah.
Be wise about situations. Maybe when you got backhand, maybe possibly you even deserved it. And it's like, then you turn the other cheek. I mean, don't stand up. Maybe you shouldn't be standing up against this because maybe you did do wrong against this person.
Yeah.
And you deserve to be kind of looked like a fool for a minute. If you're a Christian, you stand up against that, it's like, is that not pride that's saying that? That maybe you did wrong? Maybe you did dishonor this other person? Maybe they shouldn't have slapped you, but it's even worse if you stand up against it because then you're showing arrogance and pride and that you have that you're essentially saying I haven't done wrong. And that's just a scenario that goes around in my mind when I'm thinking about Jesus saying this. There's multiple layers you could go into with this. And that's just the slapping part Jesus talks about.
Yeah, well, if you took what he's saying here literally, what would that say to peaceful protesters?
What would it say about peaceful protesters?
I mean, I've heard where, like, you know, like in the 60s during the civil rights era, marching against for civil rights, some wouldn't do it because of this passage.
They wouldn't be,
because Jesus is saying don't demand your civil rights.
Oh, I see.
So there have been those in the past that use this passage.
Oh, I see.
Say you shouldn't be demanding your civil rights because Jesus says we shouldn't demand our rights. They're getting that from Matthew chapter 5 here, 38 through 42. But you have to balance that with what you see with Paul doing here, because Paul is clearly saying, no, you've treated me in an unjust way. I'm a citizen of Rome, and that's wrong. Now, he didn't press charges, so...
Yeah.
But he does say, no, you're going to come escort me out of this jail. Now, some have pointed out, you know, he did it because he didn't want to make the church look bad. He wanted to show everybody the church hadn't done anything wrong. And he's a spokesman for the church and early Christianity, and he wanted to clear his name and their name, and I don't know, that might be a stretch.
I mean,
I can't help but kind of feel like he didn't appreciate them whipping him like that.
No, I don't think, and I think it's clear that he continues this, and not in the exact same way. He doesn't repeat himself necessarily, but when he's on trial later on in the book of Acts, before Felix and the other Roman governors, you know, they're treating him wrongly. He's maybe turning the cheek for a while. He's in prison, and he knows he shouldn't be in prison, and he clearly tells them, you know that I shouldn't be in prison, and you're only holding me here to appease the Jews. And he said, you know, he uses his right. I appeal to Caesar. So there he is again.
Yep.
Calling on his rights. And it seems like he's like, all right, this isn't, maybe God is telling him, you know, the Spirit, hey, you sitting in jail. Maybe the Spirit sent him initially, hey, you need to do some writing, man. You know, you're going to be here for a while. But then at one point it's like, hey, I got some other stuff for you to do. You need to use these rights to get out of here because you got more work that needs to be done, bud. So then I think he used his right to appeal to Caesar, and from what we know, he gets out.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm thinking too about in the Old Testament, the prophets were always, you know, they were preaching against what we would call social injustice and people being exploited and taken advantage of. Might even call them human rights. So they were constantly being the social conscience of the people, trying to call them to justice and righteousness. You know, I think of Amos and some of those prophets, and even in the New Testament, you know, you can read in the book of James where he's kind of complaining about how the workers aren't getting their wages. They're underpaid. You know, that passage. So I guess what I'm saying is, God is concerned about social justice, and he does care when people are not treated in a just way.
Yeah, I think it's like the wages cry out or something like that. I know what passage you're talking about. I think it's in chapter 5, warning to the rich oppressors. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it says, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Your wealth is rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourself in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent who are not opposing you. That's some strong language right there.
So God is concerned with social justice.
Yeah.
He's even concerned with people's pay.
Well, he's saying they're doing the work and you're not paying it. You're withholding.
Yeah, you're working them poor guys to death out there in the field, and you're not paying them enough. And you're fattening yourself in the day of slaughter is basically what he's saying.
Yeah.
So God does care about how much people make. He does care when people are mistreated. And
clearly
so it's not really out of line to speak against injustice.
Yeah.
And even when we're treated in an unjust way.
I mean, yeah, I didn't think about this. I was going to say it earlier, but Paul's standing up for himself. Someone told me once that I've always internalized: if you don't stand up for yourself, who is? Great question, because probably no one is, if we're quite honest. And you matter too. You're still creating the image of God. If you don't stand up for yourself, more than likely you won't do it for other people too. That's also very true. The more you're unwilling to open your mouth and unwilling to stand up for yourself in certain things, you won't do it for other people. Let's not forget that Jesus says, turn your cheek. Did he turn the cheek when the Pharisees are telling him that he's questioning whether he's the Son of God? He fires back with some stuff like, your whitewashed tombs with bones in there.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. That's some strong language going on there. So,
yeah, I think at his trial, he said, God will smite you. Remember they slapped him?
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yep.
Yeah, so...
actually, I think that was Paul, actually. Wasn't that Paul who said that? Because he gets slapped by the high priest. And I think he says, God, here's Paul again. God Almighty will smite you on the face.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I don't think Paul somehow sinned here, and I don't think he's really at odds with Jesus. I think it's an idea here that we're not supposed to be a person that goes around demanding our rights all the time.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree with you.
And there is a time when you do say something. There is a time when you say, wait, that's not right.
Yeah.
Because if you start letting the people abuse you and your rights, then they're going to do that to somebody else too.
Yep.
It'd be like somebody breaking your house, and if you don't press charges, they're going to break in somebody else's house.
Someone else's house.
Or if you get raped or something, it's like,
yeah,
just let the guy go. He's going to rape somebody else.
He's going to do it. Yeah.
So I mean, we have to speak up against injustice.
Yeah.
So.
Because we're all connected. There's no isolated events.
Yeah.
And if you don't stand up when it's uncomfortable, you may not like it.
Yeah.
In the end, it's going to happen to someone else. Now, it matters to you first. It needs to matter to you first. You need to deal with that. And then also the recognition affects other people as well.
And in all the what's going on in our country right now, I don't think it's wrong to peacefully protest injustice.
No.
But I would draw the line at looting and rioting and burning down and attacking police officers and blinding police officers and all that.
Throwing bricks.
But clearly there's nothing wrong with a protest against civil rights abuses.
Yeah. I mean,
because that's what we see here. That's what he's doing.
I mean, because attention. Well, first, I mean, let's be honest here. If you stood before God, I mean, do you think Jesus is going to be like, that's fine, you throwing bricks at people and burning down Joe's business who had nothing to do with this? I think we're all going to agree that no, that's not right. There's a small population who agrees with that right now in our country. There's some that are too afraid to say it, but most people agree that there's radical people who are doing that. Most don't want to go against it because they're going to be afraid of what they say against them. But most people think that's wrong, I think. And then the other factor is right now that we should have peaceful protests. Attention does need to be brought to injustice. I think we're all very ignorant or foolish to think there won't be injustices. If you understand the sin nature of people, which is clearly Christian, then we know that there's going to be injustice. That's not justifying it, but what I'm saying is when that happens, peaceful protest is good because we can call attention to it and we can all point to it and be like, yep, I wouldn't want that done to me. I wouldn't want that done to my sons or my daughters or my friends.
Yeah.
And we can all huddle around that. Because to be honest, if a peaceful protest didn't do it, maybe it would blow over our heads. I mean, we got a lot of stuff going on in our lives. Work, school, family, friends, that'll book you up real quick right there. So
yeah, clearly, in the passage we looked at from Jesus, he's certainly advocating nonviolence. There's no doubt about that. And Paul's not getting violent either.
He's not asking for an armed revolt.
He could say, I want to whip a few of y'all like y'all whipped us, and I won't say nothing if you'll let me whip a few of y'all.
Yeah.
He could have said that. And I want that big politician right over there. You, that's the one. We're going to whip you. Because I saw you laughing when they whipped me.
Or I knew you instigated it too.
Yeah, that's your big idea.
Yeah.
And I want that guy too that played the race card. They're gonna bring him out here too.
Yeah. Do that, or you're gonna lose your colony status.
So see, he wasn't engaging in all that. But he did. I think he let him sweat a little bit. I'm a Roman citizen. Oh, you're going to escort us out of here. I'm not going to go away so easily.
I think.
But he left it at that. He didn't really throw any bricks or nothing like that. So,
yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So there is a time to speak up for your civil rights, but clearly it's not something we just go around and, like I say, be a grievance person all the time.
Yeah.
All right. Do we get any comments or questions?
Let's see. Dorothy put. I believe this is a comment. I think Paul's example indicates that we should stand up for our civil rights. His example is given after the law and after Christ has died. So, yeah, that's kind of what we've been talking about. So, yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I definitely agree. That's kind of what we talked about. We do to an extent need to, especially when it concerns the kingdom of God. That's another thing that's on my mind. If that's some kind, if we have resources that can advance the kingdom of God, we don't need to sit on it. It reminds me of the king and his servants when he gave them the talents. Depending on how much you were given, more is expected from you. And if you're not using what's given to you, that may be some rights you've been given. Maybe there's extra rights within our country. Maybe you're in a place of authority. Maybe you have more rights and there's more expected from you from these different rights that you've been given. And you need to take advantage of them, whatever that position is that you've been given by the Lord, and not sit on it if it's going to advance the kingdom. So I think that's another thing that should be on the back of our minds. Is I've always thought about with Paul here is maybe there's a circumstance we let things go. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at. Don't be a rebel rouser. Don't sit there, my rights, I deserve, I demand. I think Jesus is against that. I think that attitude.
Yeah.
But there's certain times where you stand up because you're standing up for yourself against abuse, against oppression. And sometimes you need to stand up because it's about standing up for others in God's kingdom. And that needs to be done too. So
right.
I think there's some wisdom. It takes wisdom to understand and discern the two, I think. And
it's good, for everybody to be aware of this particular passage, tonight. So I hope they put this in their theological toolbox if they ever need to bring it out.
Yeah, they'll be able to use it now.
Because somebody could use what the Sermon on the Mount to say, we shouldn't demand our rights. So.
Yeah, that's true.
I do think Jesus, he does kind of put the brakes on it a little bit, but Paul does say through his example, there is a time. There is a time. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things you pray about in the Holy Spirit, and you'll know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of Paul when he gets arrested too, which we'll get to later on in Acts, and I don't see him getting an attitude. I mean, he kind of allows them to arrest him and do what they need to do. Now he gets a fair trial, but he wasn't showboating either about his rights. He wasn't, you commander, I'm a Roman citizen. You need to back off. Don't you touch me. Don't have those guys touch me. You make a perimeter around me. He could have gone all attitude and superior because of his rights. I think that's another thing. We don't see Paul seeing himself as superior because of his rights. So I guess that's another thing is, some people would say, my rights and superiority type of thing, which I think Jesus
Jesus does emphasize not advocating yourself all the time. He really advocates a selfless kind of lifestyle. And I think that Sermon on the Mount kind of lets you know life ain't all about you. So,
yeah.
So, somebody that's overemphasizing themselves, it's just like pride. You bump up against it, they're ready to go off on you.
Yeah.
So the more full of yourself you are, the more likely you are to go off on somebody. And Jesus is saying, let's dial that back a little bit. Don't be this person just living for revenge and wanting to get even and put somebody in their place and and all that. He's like, let's focus on yourself so much. But again, there is a time when you do stand up for your civil rights. So anyway, is there any more questions?
That was the only one was by Dorothy right there.
Okay. We thank you, Miss Dorothy, for your insights there.
Yeah, I like it. That's good.
And all right, well, we'll close with a word of prayer in case we got anything else.
I think we're good.
All right, let's pray.
On.
Our Father in heaven, I just pray, Lord, you'd give us wisdom. Help us to know, Lord, when we should speak up for our rights and for the rights of other people. We know, Lord, you care about the oppressed and you care about injustice. And a lot of times, Lord, your church is the only conscience there is in some of the communities in our nation. And I just pray that we would always speak up for those who can't really speak for themselves, or at least don't have a very loud voice when they do speak. And just give us discernment and to know when we should speak and when we shouldn't. And I pray that none of us would be people that are full of ourselves, but full of your Spirit. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.